You look at the balance in your savings account. It appears that you are doing well compared to last year. You feel reassured, but this feeling is misplaced because the number is actually stealing your wealth. What do you know about the money in your account? It is a tool, a means of exchange, and like any tool, it can lose its edge. Every year, prices rise slightly. Bread becomes more expensive, gasoline, rent, and practically everything else follows. This is called inflation, and inflation is a certainty in the modern economy. Here's the thing that few people tell you about: the value of the money in your account is being eroded at the same rate. If the rate of inflation is 3%, while the interest rate on your savings is only 0.5%, you are losing money every day. John Maynard Keynes, one of the most influential economists of the 20th century, argued that idle money not only fails to make you rich, but actually makes you poorer, because it does not participate in the economy. Keynes believed that the money should circulate and create value, otherwise it loses the value itself. This is why your bank account is a vault, but also a grave. The people who understood this were the ones who built the system. After the stock market crash of 1929, the economy needed a stimulus. To encourage the circulation of money, central banks started to make sure that the value of money never stayed the same for long. The easiest way to do this was to allow prices to rise very slightly every year. In other words, they started to print more money and make sure that this new money always had slightly lower value than the old one. This is why your grandparents' dollar was so much stronger than yours. It could buy you much more than any modern bill. This is the point where the explanation stops being intuitive. The reason why the value of your money is eroded year after year is that the amount of money in the economy is increased, making every existing bill and every existing coin slightly smaller in value. The most prominent economist of the 20th century, Milton Friedman, actually said that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. In other words, the value of your money is determined not by some mysterious forces of nature, but by the amount of money that circulates in the economy. If there is more money, each unit will be worth less, and if there is less money, each unit will be worth more. So why do we feel that saving is good? Because it protects us from the catastrophes of the future, but it makes us vulnerable to the subtler theft of inflation. When you think about what a dollar could buy you 50 years ago, you realize that a single dollar from that time could buy you much more than anything you can afford today. That is the natural result of inflation and the way the economy is designed. But here's the thing that few people seem to realize. The people who knew this were the ones who bought real assets with their money instead of keeping cash in the bank. They took advantage of the fact that the value of their cash was artificially low and purchased much more than they would have been able to with today's money. This is sometimes called the Cantillon effect, after the 18th century economist who first noticed this phenomenon. When the value of money is artificially manipulated, the people who buy the assets first will be the ones to benefit from this, while the ones who hold cash will find that their savings fail to keep up with inflation. It is only natural that the people who bought real estate, stocks, and other assets with their hard-earned cash benefited from the lower value of the dollar. It is also natural that the people who kept their savings in cash feel cheated, but it is also natural for them to feel powerless about this fact. Understanding this dynamic is the first step to working with it instead of against it. It is human to feel that the best way to protect yourself from poverty is to save money. But the psychology of behavioral economics tells us that these savings will always fail to keep up with inflation. Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler, two game theorists who spent their careers studying the way we think about money, discovered something interesting about the way we perceive gains and losses. They found that the pain associated with losing something is much stronger than the pleasure associated with finding something. In other words, if you lose something valuable, you will feel much worse than you would have felt if you found something of the same value. This is called loss aversion, and it helps explain why most people would rather have a steady but lower income than take a risky job that might pay substantially more. The same psychology explains why most people would rather have their savings account robbed by inflation than lose 10% of their portfolio in a single day. In both cases, the loss is much worse than the gain, even if the final result is the same. Inflation is a slow, steady loss that rarely gets noticed, while market fluctuations are much more violent and therefore much more noticeable. The 2008 financial crisis is a good example of how people who kept their savings in cash were much worse off than those who invested in real assets. After the bubble burst, the people who kept their money in cash watched in horror as the value of their savings dropped every day. Meanwhile, the people who invested in real estate and the stock market saw their investments decrease substantially in value at first, but then rise to previously unimaginable heights. The people who held onto their cash through the crisis were much safer, but the people who invested in the stock market made much more money. This does not mean that keeping emergency funds is not important, because it is, but it does mean that the money you save should not be kept in cash. It should be invested in assets that will appreciate in value faster than the rate of inflation. Benjamin Graham, the economist who taught Warren Buffett, once said that money that does not make money is actually losing money. Every day that you keep your savings in the bank is a day when it fails to protect you from inflation. The whole point of this system is that it was designed to hurt the poor and the middle class by making sure that their savings would always fail to keep up with the general increase in prices. This is the main reason why most people are much poorer than they would have been if the value of their savings actually kept up with inflation. Once you understand this, you will realize that the best way to work with the system is to make sure that your assets grow at a faster rate than the rate of inflation. That way, you will actually be making money from the system instead of losing money to it. So, what is the lesson for you? An emergency fund should always be in cash, because you will need it immediately when you need it, but the money you save for later should not stay in cash, because it will fail to keep up with inflation. It should be invested in the assets that will appreciate in value faster than the rate of inflation. This way, you will actually make money from the system instead of losing money to it. This is why Benjamin Graham, the economist who taught Warren Buffett, once said that money that does not make money is actually losing money. Every day that you keep your savings in the bank is a day when it fails to protect you from inflation.